Do you need treatment for obesity or any related abdominal procedures? The community hospital now offers minimally invasive laparoscopic surgery done by an American-trained, board-certified surgeon with over 20 years' experience. Give us a call at 235-5479 for more information.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
The fluid retention occurs in the lungs and they get short of breath, particularly with exertion, and is a particularly condition where when lying down they feel short of breath and have to use a lot of pillows. That's a sign that the shortness of breath might be due to heart failure.
WESN.
Transitions of power is a hell of a thing, you know, because everybody has to get accustomed to new roles, new responsibilities. For the media, it's basically you have to now learn the new government. You have to start to get, in theory, a working relationship with people that all of a sudden now you have to, not necessarily it's about addressing them differently, but literally, if you want certain information, you have to go to different people. Everything's reversed. One of the other things, of course, is that the political parties themselves have to get used to their new role. One of those parties, they're not necessarily unaccustomed, although one could argue that the people currently in that party might be a bit unaccustomed, given they're relatively new, some of them, while others have been on the outside looking in on their own accord due to their own actions for a couple of years now. It's interesting that the Tobago Council of PNM and the PDP is saying don't count them out after the general election defeat. And to some extent, at least for the Tobago Council, I can understand why. It's not as though they were outright rejected, so to speak. They lost, though. And to some extent, they should take the lessons of defeat. But at the same time, it's not to say that they have no support at all. The same can't necessarily be said about the PDP, relatively speaking. What is the point of a Tobago party that could get barely any support in Tobago? I guess you could ask that question. Now, I haven't necessarily checked back the full figures themselves, but for the most part, it seems as though Watson Duke did not necessarily get the support that his party's position, or at least past, one would have hoped for. So now that we've reached this point, do we count him out? Given the promises and the statements he made on the campaign trail, I don't necessarily have any reason to be curious to want to see more. So the question is, what is he going to do in order to maintain his relevance, given the fact that it's not as though he's given us much to go on with what he brings to the table moving forward. Fact of the matter is, in the past, when the PDP won the THA election, what he brought to the table was a party that had people, that had a message. But to some extent, how far did his message go? Meanwhile, the Tobago Council needs to potentially really take a hard look, in my opinion, not just at themselves, but also just exactly what is the relationship between the PNM Tobago Council and the PNM Central Executive. Because it seems more often than not the PNM Tobago Council is little brother to Big Brother in Trinidad. It parallels Chief Secretary Farley's Augustine's criticisms, even though I would caution to not make it about Trinidad and Tobago. But the Tobago Council seems more than happy to just exist and allow central government to have the final say, the actual control over Tobago affairs. Tobago is technically wanting autonomy, but it's not to say that it is a complete dependent with no say in its future even right now. But we didn't necessarily see that played out by the Tobago Council. It's almost like if they're not really a Tobago Council of Representatives for Tobago, they're a Tobago Council of Representatives for the political leader in Trinidad. But that goes back to party politics. It's all about the leader. I have to get permission from the leader. It's what the leader says. Follow the leader. But you're not voted necessarily, in theory, to follow the leader. When you're called representative, alderman, councilman, assemblyman, it's supposedly to represent the people who voted you in whatever body they voted you in for. And perhaps the whole party politics has gone so far now that it puts the Tobago Council, whether it realizes it or not, in an awkward position, which it has been in for quite some time. You can't campaign on autonomy and then not really do much, if anything, to deliver on autonomy. But you did the same thing for local government reform. So meanwhile, said party is looking to elect a new chairman, and I would argue that it really needs to maybe even move a little bit faster. But I fear that the internal politics of yesterday are still affecting the internal politics of today, in which case we might end up with a PNM not too dissimilar, despite the fact that we did acknowledge the possibility, the legacy of the PNM, if you look at it, and maybe years down the line it'll be clearer in hindsight, the legacy, the course might be going back in a Manning direction, Manning-like direction. Whatever direction it was on from its point of origin till the removal of Mr. Manning as political leader, perhaps it's going back to that direction. Now the question is, do you perceive that it went off course with Dr. Keith Rowley or not? That is a complicated question. A lot of his critics will want to just make an absolute case out of this. So it's a complicated question. But the fact of the matter is, whether or not it was a good direction, a bad direction, or other, it was a rejected direction in the end, just like how the people rejected Mr. Manning in his end. Fair enough. Do you necessarily want to repeat the mistakes of the past again? That is the question the PNM needs to ask itself if it really believes in things like good governance and for the people, as opposed to internal political backfighting for internal political ambitions. To what extent is that? Has that played out in the past? Is that playing out now? And I'm not meaning to imply anything about the current opposition to be leader going to be sworn in today. In some respects, arguably, I hear more that she's a victim of these things than a major player in these things. I could be wrong, but that's the perception, I think, outside looking in for a lot of people. So we have to see how it moves on. Because, again, you want a strong opposition in order to temper the steel of the government and make the government stronger. Otherwise, we kind of going nowhere fast. With that said, the last thing is this. The former Prime Minister is basically saying or cautioning against those who hope for moving on from Dragon to other regional partners. And I do find it very interesting. Because here comes Stuart Young, the man who was criticized for being tone deaf before the election. Let's make that clear. people had that perception of the PNM, and it was said publicly, but for the most part, it seemed as though they ignored it. Criticized after the election for being tone deaf, criticized for his concession speech for being defiant and, dare I say, tone deaf, and then in probably one of the most egregious, albeit minor, yet unforced error of displaying tone deafness, he posts a picture of himself on the beach as though the actions of you peasants do not bother me. I am unbothered by your nonsense that is below me. And then now wants to come and offer criticism, but not necessarily offer enough substantial technical meat behind the criticism. Based on what I've seen so far, maybe I'm wrong. Because at the end of the day, you want to say, oh, it's not so easy with Guyana, or it's not so easy with Greendot, or are the reserves there, will you find it, etc., etc. Well, first of all, when he said that, when he was reported to have questioned about the availability of gas, or given the phrasing that he used about Guyana, I kind of wondered what it was that he was on, and maybe we should make that illegal, whatever it is, because it's kind of silly. But more importantly, how is it that you could, with a straight face, question the potential of Grenada and Guyana, and yet want to say that the possibility of Dragon is still open? Granted, Dragon exists, so as long as Dragon exists, there is more than a 0% chance of it actually coming to fruition. Granted. But dare I say, as long as an American agenda sanctioning Venezuela, you know, our main trading partner where we import the majority of our food from, as long as that guy doesn't want to give us exemptions to the sanctions, how does Dragon exist? This already starts off. I have complained that the UNC did this time immemorial. You think that I could just let this pass? The first public utterance you have after your defiance of the results, or your aloofness, nonchalance of the results, is to basically say, oh, be careful because what they have ain't that good. Buddy, what you were proposing, at the very least, we know wasn't happening anytime soon. And it's literally just opposing for opposing's sake, because you're not necessarily offering any good analysis. Young said that even if there are significant gas reserves there, the country needs to focus on feasibility. Okay. Any pipeline would have to go through Venezuela. Okay. It's more realistic that we could get a pipeline through Venezuelan waters than we could get the Dragon deal done. It's more realistic we could figure something out with Guyana than we could get the Dragon deal done right now. Unless you have something more to offer than just saying that, making a statement without anything behind it. I don't know what to tell you. You can't still be trying to sell us on Dragon. It's almost like if whatever mama guy called Imbe did on Reginald Lamour, Nicholas Maduro did on Stuart Young. And I really do now have to question. Because if there was legitimate technical reasoning to back up the commitment to Dragon, fine. But we never really got that, did we? We never really got a detailed analysis of why Dragon is the best potential source of gas over all these other potential alternatives. We knew that commentators and analysts did mention Guyana. We knew that Guyana said, tough luck, we ain't working with them. We knew that Guyana said, oh, we'll work with the UNC now. Is it sour grapes? What is it about Dragon that is so sacrosanct to you? Because you clung to it so much, it potentially was a major contributing factor of you losing the election, and you're still doubling down. You haven't learned anything? At the very least, right now, 2025, May the 6th, you could say this: the UNC is better than the PNM because they seemingly learned from their mistakes, stood sweet and won the election because of that learning. But hey, it's all right. It's okay. Man, get in on a safe seat and think he knows best. All right, cool. It's going to be a long 5 years at this rate. Probably a long 10 years, if we're honest. All right, enough of this. Let's go straight into the daily review. All right, we'll get into the cabinet more with my guests, but in the meantime, I do have to bring up one of the things that I think, unfortunately, might already be, it could be the first mistake in public communication. And that is a direct promise was made, and it is similar, although maybe not quite as bad, but it's similar to what the Commissioner of Police, the Commissioner, not the acting Commissioner, the last Commissioner, earlier Christopher, said near the beginning, if not at the beginning of her term. In fact, the time frame is not too dissimilar. Back when she became Commissioner of Police, when questioned, so I think it may have been a month after her appointment perhaps, but it was still early on, she did say that she will get crime reduced by June. So we're talking like 4 to 5 months. Now, the current administration is saying that they will get crime down in 6 months. It's not that much longer than the promises the Commissioner of Police made. And at the time when she made it, I did say that's a bad idea to say that publicly and to make that promise. My opinion on such a thing does not change. Now, granted, the fact that you've split the Ministry of National Security up and you have more people and potentially more staff to tackle the problem could allow you to get some quick victories because you're able now to have the focus on various things done by multiple people. And in fact, to some extent, that's what the previous administration did when they brought in Keith Scotland to be a minister in the ministry. A lot of the semantics of how many ministries and who's a minister of what ministry, to some extent, if it comes to ministerial appointments, as far as I'm aware, and I could be wrong, junior minister, senior minister, gets the salary of a minister, right? I said it before. The UNC does more ministries, the PNM does more junior ministers. It works out to be the same thing. It's arguably ridiculous, except if you want to say that there's a lot of work to be done. Fine, we didn't necessarily see a lot of work done by the previous cabinet. We will wait to see if this cabinet does a lot of work. But in the meantime, promising 6 months, I have a hard time seeing any substantial reductions in crime in 6 months, outside of something like a state of emergency to suppress the situation. Because part of what the Minister of Homeland Security himself brought up is the fact that they need to ensure that the TTPS has all the equipment it needs. Part of what, well, the implied legislative agenda from the Prime Minister herself or the AG is that they need to fix certain laws with regards to supporting, I believe it was the Prime Minister who said that, to support Homeland Security, so to support the crime fight. The AG part of the legislative agenda is that. You're not going to see results from those initiatives in 6 months. If you started off with like raids and all kind of, I mean, even investigations might potentially take longer than 6 months. Short-term police action now, for now, we've seen that not work with the SOE, unless you're saying that you're going to build upon the successes of the previous state of emergency called by the previous administration. If you're going to say that, fine. And to some extent, I would have a lot of respect, if that's the case, for any government willing to admit that they're going to build upon the successes, if there are any, of its predecessor, whichever government of the day. But we have to wait and see how this turns out, because ultimately speaking, dare I say, I don't necessarily know what national defense has to do now, unless you're saying that we need to prepare for an invasion by Venezuela, or Guyana, or Barbados, or the United States. I don't know. What is the mission of national defense? Is the mission of national defense to support Homeland Security? To some extent, you could have then maybe accomplished whatever you wanted to accomplish by saying junior minister. Again, dare I say, I believe there's an insubordination problem in the national security services who want to act as though they are normal public servants, just like any cleric or administrator or bureaucrat who, according to the union, this is their responsibilities and we don't have to necessarily do all kind of mamagai nonsense. Paramilitary organizations, yes, there are rules by which what is a lawful and unlawful order and what their responsibilities are and are not, but there's also a different standard of responsibility that we don't necessarily see really being undertaken by most people in uniform. One thing though, while I did say that, and I'll end with this, I don't think the Prime Minister should have said 6 months. You're setting yourself up for your first loss. If you succeed, great. It's a gamble. You'll look really good if you succeed. You'll look like you're no better than your predecessor if you fail. But, except the new Minister of Homeland Security, he did say that he's going to form a new anti-crime plan. And he's probably going to get points just for saying the opposite of what Fitzgerald Hines said. I don't know how else to say it. Because he's not forming a plan for the police to execute. He's forming an overall plan. You see, this is when you have to understand language, but not necessarily be stuck by a narrow interpretation. Depending, I don't know, maybe he's going to overstep and he's going to dictate a plan for the police, but the Minister of Homeland Security, National Security, whatever security, they still need to have a plan. They still need to have a plan and a vision and a directive so that the police then, unless you're going to say, well, the police just is a crapshoot, they do whatever they want to do. Well, then what's the point of having you as any government? The political cabinet member appointed to oversee that portfolio still needs to have a plan for his responsibilities. And when Fitzgerald Hines says, I don't need to have a plan, that basically sounded like, I don't know what I'm doing or I don't want to work. That's what it sounded like. It doesn't matter what the reality is behind the scenes. I'm not saying the minister was lazy or irresponsible. I am saying that he set himself up to be perceived that way. And Roger Alexander has set himself up to not be perceived that way. So kudos to that. It didn't necessarily take much wisdom to figure that out, which is why it was so disappointing to people when then Minister Hines said what he said. And the fact that the government didn't necessarily understand that, or the then government, sorry, we have to get used to it, didn't necessarily understand that, then all the way up to now is amazing. And again, it doesn't matter if they did or didn't. We are perceived that they didn't. That's why they lost. So this is a reasonable sign. Let's not make the same mistakes as them. I could appreciate that. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll welcome the guest. Stay tuned. This is Talking About on WSN. We'll be right back after this.
My name is Dr. Stephen Carroll, the CEO at Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist, and we are committed to making good private health care affordable.
For all your medical needs, including dental, radiology, laparoscopy, behavioral and mental health, along with many other services, contact us for more information at 235-5479.
Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
Our award-winning show is back, and this season promises to be even more exciting than before. What's Up, Doc isn't just a title, it's a call to action for anyone who wants to improve their health and well-being. Join us on this thrilling ride towards better health on WESN Content Capital.
As always, we appreciate you starting your day with us. Let's get into this morning's first conversation.
Is the country's healthcare system more at risk, more than ever?
Why it has remained unaddressed for so long.
Political parties get lots of cash, big cash from financiers, and then when they get that now, you can't account for it.
But it's really the specialist nurses who we are in a greater shortfall for.
We can tap into the resources and have them, at least form some mentorship programs.
Highlight our food systems, and which will attract persons from all over the world to come and experience something that actually supports the local economy.
We're lucky that we have a vibrant legal system that allows change to take place, and it's not that matters are just swept under the carpet and discrimination is allowed to be perpetrated.
A lot of people don't know that, there were attempts to ban the carnival, suppress the carnival.
And we're back here on Talking Point at WSND, Content Capital Show. Michael Small, joined by geopolitical scientist, analyst extraordinaire, Dr. Shane Mohammed. Dr. Mohammed, welcome back to Talking Point.
Thank you. I'm in my hoodie today because I'm tired.
Yes, one would have hoped that, so long after the election, you would have had chance to recover, but I guess,
No, the answer is no.
That's the thing, right? The election was, last week, and yet we're still technically in that mode of trying to, I don't know, how to say this, the whole transition.
Yeah, I think it's the before, it's during, the after, and the after the after. So we have some time again. Now we speak about, the formation of the cabinet. We talk about appointments. We talk about governance. We talk about what is achieved in the next couple of days and weeks and months to come. Short-term wins, medium-term wins, long-term wins, so that sort of thing. So again, obviously the cycle doesn't end, but hopefully the workload and the research load gets a little bit lighter because people still have papers to mark, right?
Wow. Well, I'm sorry if, the governance of the country and your analysis of it is getting in the way of your day job. But
it's not. It's not. I'm grateful. I could say that. But I'm grateful. I'm really grateful. I must say that this has been one of the most successful election seasons for me personally. And I'm grateful for the opportunities that have been presented. But I need to go back to marking papers, at least to make sure my students have their marks to move on to the next level.
To be fair, you take too long, they'll all start to look at you funny. So I could understand that you don't want to necessarily put it off for too much longer. That said, that's an interesting analogy. Of course, one of the obvious media things to do is to grade things, right? If you're a sports journalist, you want to grade a team's roster. If you're an entertainment journalist, you want to grade a movie or a performance. And if you're a political analyst, scientist, commentator, you want to grade government decisions. And I guess in this case now, we have a new cabinet. We are yet to necessarily, obviously you don't necessarily know fully what a government's agenda is until you actually start to see it implemented, right? Actions speak louder than words. So of course we have a budget to look forward to. That's going to be our major indicator. We have a mid-year review. That's going to be a smaller indicator. And now at the start of the situation where we see most but not all, because the Trade and Tourism Minister has yet to have been selected officially, but we see most of the cabinet. They've already spoken to the media, given some of their preliminary thoughts. We're kind of starting to see the agenda of the government of how they want to tackle problems. And you were telling me just before we came on air, part of it is how certain ministries were either split or how certain ministries are potentially grouped, because you see similarities in their responsibilities, like, say, education and tertiary education and skills training, or home security and national defense. These groupings, right, will allow separate ministers with separate staffs to tackle various issues and not necessarily be burdened with the responsibilities of what the other guy is handling. And perhaps this could be a sign that, look, one way or the other, and we'll still have to judge it, the results when it's over, but the government is potentially trying to be aggressive right now to say, let's hit all of these problems. We're going to put enough people in place so that everybody could focus on the various issues we have, because you ask anybody before the election, we have a lot of issues.
Yeah, no, for real. In particular, I was listening to the news last night, and for the first time, actually, every single person that the news asked a question as it pertained to, do they believe and do they have confidence that the ministers of national security, well, I'm saying national security, but the ministers of defense and homeland security can deal with crime? And every single person that answered said yes. And they had confidence in Roger Alexander's ability to do the job and get the job done. And that was the first time in a very long time that persons who actually, said yes to something and there's an expectation. So, and if we look at the speech says, for our speech, it says, much is given, much is expected. And that is exactly what I think is important here, that the Prime Minister understands that, she's been given this mandate. And let's be real, she is the only Prime Minister in modern history to win 2 elections separately from each other and end up with constitutional majorities or near constitutional majorities. So that people say, well, she doesn't have constitutional majority because she's at 26. But if you add the negotiations that have started with regards to Tobago, then there's a partnership that can be, built there for the purposes of achieving certain legislative goals, constitutional reform goals. And I think that's a step in the right direction. I also anticipate that, when the opposition leader is sworn in later today and the opposition starts its work as well, that there's going to be a level of communication between the new Prime Minister and the new opposition leader. So there's some really good wins. For all this could be, and I don't want to sound utopian, but at the same time, I don't want to sound pessimistic, because we have to give people the opportunity and we have to give people the chance to do right or wrong, as the case may be. And we judge them by that.
That's natural, because when the PNM came into power, one could argue they looked a lot better, or they were perceived to be a lot better than, let's just say, the last 3 to 4 years, right? The last 3 to 4 years, well, no, maybe not the last 4 years. The last 2 to 3 years, something really changed. Talking point, that first year, we were able to say good things, that the government did, but all of a sudden it got really hard to find things that the public would accept as positives, that we could say, oh, this isn't as bad as you think. It found really difficult. To some extent, that's the nature of politics. The longer you're there, the more there's there to criticize and dislike about you. So when you now come in, the more there is to like about you, because it's all about the potential. It's not about the actuality yet. Now, speaking about potential, let's kick off the discussion, because, of course, we saw the AG come in, but we have there the Minister of Homeland Security. This was one of the big, and dare I say, I don't think anybody would call this as a failure. Now, again, the potential. It's a successful appointment. It's a successful attempt to go potentially outside the box. So to say, you get a former police officer who was a public figure, you make him Minister of Homeland Security, you put him with a focused agenda. You deal with crime internally. You deal with domestic crime. That's your experience. We're not asking you to have to learn other things and be distracted with other things. And I think so far the public perceives this to be a positive in an area that for a couple of years now was seen as a big negative for the government, or the then government.
I agree. In fact, you know, when you look at the whole government, all of the ministerial appointments, all of the ministers in the ministry, all the parsecs, there's very little that anybody could say that, you know, is concerning to them. And there were none of those appointments for me were much of a surprise. In fact, when I was writing the notes as to who is what where, I'm like, okay, all right, this is okay, this is great, this is good. Because what I'm seeing is that we don't have a cabinet where ministers are operating in silos, and that's very important. That's a new government approach, because after 10 years where you had persons seem to be competent in different fields and in different spheres, the level of delivery was very low. So you have the perception of high performance ministers, but the result is low in terms of their outcomes and their achievables. Now that's very dangerous. Here we have a prime minister that has put together a cabinet. It's pretty small. It's 25 members of cabinet. That's one of the smallest ever. That's a huge shift from her approach in 2010 to 2015. And now you have not only just ministers, you have teams. You have teams of ministers. So, for example, in the ministry, under the framework of legislation, you have the Attorney General, the Minister of Justice, and the Minister of Legal Affairs, all operating in one building, or with one permanent secretary. So there's that. You have the Minister of Defense and the Minister of National Security, well, the Minister of Homeland Security, working in one building with one permanent secretary. In a team, you have minister.
It will be one permanent secretary?
Yeah, so the list that I have says that, you know, yeah, of course there's going to be different permanent secretaries, more than one per ministry, but these are the same, so they're not located any differently than they were. So, for example, the ministry, under the Ministry of National Security, which was, you know, the framework of the thing, you have both the Minister of Defense and the Minister of Homeland Security operating from Temple Court, and they share permanent secretaries.
And it'll just be single permanent secretary, or there'll be
But there's
deputies?
more than one, depending on the size of the ministry, right? So let me just open the document for you so you get an idea. So you have the Office of the Prime Minister. And Office of the Prime Minister, you have 5 permanent secretaries, because there are 5 sectors under the Office of the Prime Minister. So they have Office of the Prime Minister, Whitehall, and that's something we got to get to, because Whitehall was a shocker for me. Then you have St. Clair, where there's that huge building that houses the other 3 aspects of the ministry, of the Office of the Prime Minister. And then you have CAST, which is in Tobago. But then, under the framework of the Attorney General, which is in the Attorney General Legal Affairs Towers, you have the Attorney General, the Minister in the Ministry of the Attorney General, the Minister of Justice, who is the same person, and then you have the Minister of Legal Affairs. So, and they have one permanent secretary. Then you go to the Ministry of Agriculture, which is in Chaguanas. You have one PS there. You have one PS for Community Development and Culture. So you have a merging of ministries there where you have one PS. Then you have, in the Ministry of Defense, you have the Defense Minister, the Homeland Security Minister, which are housed at Temple Court. There are 2 permanent secretaries there. You have Education, where you have the Minister of Education, the Minister of Tertiary Education, which is in the Education Towers, where there's 2 permanent secretaries for each to serve that ministry.
Right.
There's the Minister of Energy, where they have 2 ministers. You have Finance, where there's 1 minister, but he has 4 PSs. And Foreign Affairs, you have 2 ministers. Health, you have 2 ministers, all with 1 PS. Housing, 2 ministers, 1 PS. Labor.
Let's go back because I want to get, we just spoke about the Homeland Security Minister. One thing about defense, though, and people see it as a success, I kind of think of it more of a side grade to some degree, because my issue is, at least with regards to a portfolio, I don't know what extent the responsibilities are for the new Minister of National Defense. Because,
well, we have to take into consideration that defense speaks to all of our defense, our armed forces, while the president is commander-in-chief of the armed forces, she's not the administrator, right? She's the commander. So what you have is that Greendot is, so how I see it under the national security framework, merging both homeland and defense together under national security, what you have is you have Sturge, who is the legal mind, and then you have Alexander, who's the operational mind. So you have the legal and the operational working together to create functional. So that's how I see it in that regard. Now, it's a good move because where one has, and they also, in my opinion, each minister is placed there as a check and a balance on the other minister, so that when a question is asked, somebody has to say what the truth is if the error arises or the mismanagement or the lack of services. Somebody has to account. You can't have two people in one ministry and nobody know what the other one doing, right? Because they're put there to work together. And while you have, and yes, they have specific responsibilities, but the bottom line is that their responsibilities does not take away. They're not working as a silo. They are there to work as a team.
Does the National Security Council still exist as we kind of know it, but just now with more ministers, or is that also subject to change?
Well, no, the National Security Council, as far as I know, obviously they consist of all the arms of national security in terms of the apparatus, and then the Prime Minister then co-opts the different individuals, different ministers into the National Security Council, as it pertains to the elements of governance that touch and concerns national security. So I guess it's up to her discretion as well, and the necessity that is needed.
All right, let's go. Well, there's so many to get to. Let's just go to the Minister of Justice as well, because I do find this is an interesting appointment where the agenda for the Attorney General, we're speaking about this off air, the Minister of Justice has a very different, I guess you could say, marching orders. The AG, he's going to be looking at things like repealing the Revenue Authority. That's a whole separate debate. Also, he's supposed to be supporting national security overall with potential new legislation coming down the pipe. That was what the Prime Minister said, I believe, when she herself was sworn in on Thursday. But then comes the Minister of Justice, and a lot of what they're supposed to be doing is to deal with, from what I understand, the judiciary and the inefficiencies that you get there, because people need to understand the death penalty, it's not that it's outlawed, it's just the process takes so long that the Privy Council says, if you're going to take this long, you can't do it anymore, because it's inhumane to have someone on death row for so long. I don't necessarily understand that. If they're deserving of the death penalty, then arguably, do I necessarily care about the pain and suffering they have waiting to be on death row?
That's where the law lords and the British law lords, they talk about human rights and all of that. And, but in terms of justice, justice is also not about the administration of justice. It is the operationalization of justice. And therefore, the operationalization of justice requires that there be some levels of synchronization between, and not political interference. I'm talking about synchronization of operations. The judiciary for years has been talking about the need for greater funding, and that, there's monies that needs to be spent in terms of getting the systems and the facilities and all that up and running. Has the former government been able to achieve such things? Not to the extent and the speed that the partnership administration had forwarded just the justice agenda. And therefore, we're talking about the Immigration Detention Center, you're talking about the prison service, you're talking about legal aid, you're talking about police complaints authority, you're talking about workmen's compensation, electronic monitoring and evaluation. I mean, there are so many different things that fall under justice that actually contributes to speedy justice. And, Trinidad and Tobago is one of the few countries, when you look at Jamaica, their Ministry of Justice is working quite fine. And it's been quite a few years since it's in operations and in existence. And I humbly disagree with the former Attorney General on that, the fact that justice is nothing but makeup, and it's just it's not a real ministry, but it is, because there are certain things that pretty much fall by the wayside, and this is how to put it. We need to be able to work. We need a government that works in as a team, and teams that are created, specialized teams that are created in order for the ministries to become more effective and for governance to be seen as being served quicker than it is now. And therefore, when you have men who have experience, you have 3 lawyers, and they come together and they sit, and one may have been predominantly civil, one may be predominantly criminal family, as the case may be in their fields of law. When they come together, they identify, and they're able to also have a dialogue with the administration of the judiciary to say, what are the issues, how can we help, what is required. It may be an act of law, it may be a policy, it may be funding, it may be accommodations. There are so many different things that prevent the effective administration of justice. It could be a matter of the amount of matters that are existing before the judiciary outweighs the amount of judges that exist. So all of those things are part and parcel. And what prevents the judiciary from appointing more judges is the law. What prevents the judiciary from hiring new people? Money. So location, space. So those are things that are important. What I must say is that to get the ball rolling, yes, there are 1 or 2 new ministries. So, for example, the Ministry of Works and Transport under the former administration is now the Ministry of Works and Infrastructure and the Ministry of Transport and Civil Aviation. But the location of those 2 ministries are in one building with 2 PSs. So that is very important to look at, that while ministries were created, there was no extra rent, there's no extra additional facilities to be built out, money spent on desk and chair and computers and outfitting. No, it exists already, and if it exists already, we utilize what there is. But doesn't mean that we can't house 2 different ministries in one building and have 2 ministers work together. I'm waiting to see what the Gazette says, because I do believe that ministries are tagged with teams, and there will be a leading minister and a supporting minister, or there may be 2 leading ministers, one being more senior, but the 2 having collaborative leadership work to do. That's something I think is important.
One thing I want to ask is legal affairs. Is that basically just to now deal with trying the legislative agenda and cleaning things up and a lot of the housekeeping and stuff like that?
Legal affairs is the electronic access and digitization of documents, legal documents that we require, birth certificates, all the different things that fall under the Registrar General's purview in terms of legalities, in terms of documentation. So you could quote unquote say there's like the civil aspect of it. The Attorney General's office is the legislative aspect of it, and the Ministry of Justice could be the criminal and / administrative as well aspect of it. So you have all 3 ministries working in synchronization with each other, having a specific mandate to fulfill.
So now we've seen, of course, not everything was a split per se, because there are some junior ministers. There is a junior minister in the Ministry of Energy, one of the union leaders, who is a area president, former area president of the OWTU. So to some extent, they will have experience in the area, some understanding of the area. Of course, Dr. Rudal Mundial, he's an experienced politician. Of course, that comes with baggage, right? But I was saying yesterday, look, he's now appointed, we should give him a chance to prove or disprove, to show us what he could do, to show us how he's going to do it. Meanwhile,
he's one of the most senior members of the cabinet, and one of the most senior members of the bench of the government. So I expected that he would get something big, and I think it's very strategic to put him in energy, because energy understands. Remember, Dr. Munlal is a specialist in labor and urban planning and all of that's his PhD, right? So that's one. Energy is very labor based. He's an attorney at law. He knows how to negotiate. He has a level of experience, not level, but he has a lot of experience in cabinet responsibilities and that sort of thing. So putting him in a ministry where we need someone to be the driver and the mover and the shaker, I can see why she's put him there.
But it's not just that. The fact that it's a junior minister, she didn't split it this time.
The junior minister understands the operations of it, the people-centered aspect of it.
But my point is,
issues are.
My point is, you could say that this is one of the points of emphasis, right? Yeah. As much as we want to say diversification, at the end of the day, energy is still in the immediate to short to medium term one of the pillars of our economy, whether we like it or not. And in fact, we need it in order to help smooth the transition. So this is not an area where she necessarily had a split, and no, this is a focus thing, and she put a second minister here to say, this is that important, and we're going to move forward with it. Is that fair to say?
I agree. Yes, and in addition to that, energy now no longer means renewable energy. We have to take into consideration that an aspect of our manifesto spoke heavily about moving from renewable energy to non-renewable energy sources. So the task needed 2 ministers, because you need to be able to focus on, one, going out there and building an economy that is revenue based on renewables, but also a resource pool for non-renewables as well. So it's a huge task ahead, and it requires 2 ministers.
I mean, dare I say, the economic part of the Ministry of Energy, the renewable side is indirect and not really going to make up for the non-renewable side at best, because it's not just about powering our lights, it's a revenue earner. So this is not something, we're not like the rest of the Caribbean who the transition is very natural. To us, it will be very, very difficult, because technically fossil fuels is for 2 functions and renewables is only for 1 of them.
Yes.
Now, one of the things that I find interesting is the split between education and tertiary education and skills training, because I have been saying for a while, education is one of the areas that right now it's been a problem. I think a lot of people underestimate just how bad the problems are in our education system. And before COVID, I was hearing when that they would change, the Ministry of Education was changing the syllabus every year. Teachers now all of a sudden was having to spend more time trying to learn what they were supposed to teach rather than being proficient in what they're teaching in order to efficiently teach it. Some primary school teachers who they've been teaching all their lives, in the later years, recently they had to have assistants. They're overworked. Basically, it's still to get kids at 11 to 12-year-olds to take an exam in order to get to secondary school. The goal has not changed, but their job became a lot more difficult. And then, of course, COVID exposed some deficiencies in the teaching system. And then, of course, the crime situation and the economic situation is exposing more deficiencies. To some extent, is there going to be more focus put on education? Or, I mean, granted, the people chosen, particularly the Minister of Education himself, this is a choice that people were anticipating, right? Even before the election, that the former principal of NAPS could be Minister of Education. Is this something that we might see more of? Because I'm hoping to see a much more thorough commitment in order to making improvements to the education system.
Well, the Prime Minister did always have a vision, even in 2010 to 15, that there should be greater focus on, at the tertiary level, not only just making life easier for students at the tertiary level in terms of academia, but also in technical vocational skills. And I think that's a very important aspect, that while we push academia, yes, people want to get degrees and they want to become professionals in the various spheres and whatnot. We have to take into consideration that there's a huge cross-section of our society of students that are also very skilled in tech work, and technical vocational skills is very important. In today's world, I have a friend, she has her boys studying, to become professionals, but that doesn't prevent them from learning skills so that they can utilize skills to become, skilled, I should say, or multidimensional in terms of the approach to life. So therefore, skills, textbook and tests in terms of technical tertiary education and skills training is very important. And I also think that these two ministers will be working out of the same building, and I guess their offices will be as close as possible to each other, even on the same floor, so they can. Both of them are academics. Professor Prakash Prasad is an academic. Yes. Dr. Michael Dowlat is an academic. They have experience in both the in the education system for many years. So these fellows don't come without the level of experience, knowledge, and understanding of where the flaws are in both the tertiary and secondary and primary school areas. So yes, Prime Minister, obviously, also having been a former Minister of Education, Prime Minister has always been, and it's not been a secret. She said it all the time that education is one of her key focuses, because her mantra is that education is a gateway out of poverty, and therefore Dr. Dowlat in particular is going to be tasked with ensuring that the systems that exist now, from ECCE to all the way to secondary schools, are improved. I see tutor, I see the stakeholders in education are welcoming the move to split it, because again, streamlining is very important, and it closes the gaps that are created that causes governance to fail. So that's important as well. And it doesn't, and they're not miles apart from each other. They're in the same building, so they can literally, ideas, thoughts, policies.
One leads into the next.
Correct.
I would say this. I found it interesting. I noted that the president, she seemingly took a little bit extra time to speak to them as she was handing them the documentation on the podium.
I have to say that in the days that and I pay attention to body language.
Yeah.
And what I must say that I enjoyed is that the president was very acknowledging of the persons that were appointed. And she took the time to congratulate Dr. Dowlat. She took a lot of time to congratulate him, speak with him, Professor Prasad, the younger ones in terms of Michelle Benjamin. A lot of the young ministers and the Palsecs were very well greeted by Her Excellency the President. I thought it was very honorable, very classy. It means that, she sees herself as head of state and understands that role. But there was another thing I have to say, and I have to give credit to, and it's very encouraging, actually. So there were 2 accidents. In fact, one of my friends was on the highway, and she was driving up the highway. We were talking, and she said to me, the evening of the swearing in, she said, the boss lady looked like she on the road already, boy. I was like, what you mean? She said, well, up ahead, I'm seeing a lot of blue lights in the Freeport, somewhere around the Chaguanas area. There's a lot of blue lights. And I was like, oh, really? And she's like, yeah, rail traffic. There's a lot of traffic. We little backed up. The boss lady causing all this traffic already. And we were talking, while she was waiting in the traffic. And it turned out, she said to me, she said, way boy, no, this is not, it's not her. I said, what is the problem? She said, a massive car crash accident on the highway. If you see how much police and ambulance, and the reason why they were stuck is that the accidents had happened on the one lane, that there were barriers on either side, so there's no way that they could divert the traffic onto the other lane, the southbound lane of the highway, because she was heading north. And she said, this is terrible, because it was not one, it was two accidents, sorry. And
2 separate accidents.
2 separate accidents that took place that blocked the road because they had to pull cars and whatnot. So obviously the news carried that the Prime Minister was going to be delayed. And then, I was talking to other person, and like, what was the problem? I was like, well, I just heard that there's a serious accident on the highway, and if she can't pass, then because of the barriers on the highway, the kind of accident it is, there's no way she's going to be able to pass until they move it. And this was about 4 o'clock, to be honest, about 5 to 4, and the news kept breaking and coming back. And then the office of the president issued a statement indicating that the Honorable Prime Minister would have been delayed because of an accident on the highway. And when the Prime Minister did arrive, clearly, knowing that she was late, you saw that she literally was walking really quickly into President's house, and the cameras captured that way she was talking to the Honorable Chief Justice and indicating to him, she was very, animated, and she's like, that's a really bad, you could tell that she was saying that's a really bad accident on the highway there, and whatnot. But when the President arrived, just before she turned the corner to see to sit by her seat, she kind of popped her head over like this and looked at the lady, and she asked her, she shook her hand, and she had a few words to say. You see that synchronization, that transference of power, that coming together of the head of state and the head of government, and that being shown on national television, and people observing the engagement and the body language. Sean, I will not lie to you, that is very, very, very encouraging, very, very pleasing to me. And I think if that sustains in the next 5 years, we are now poised, and I always believe in the spirit of Trinidad and Tobago, and we are very much poised to make a difference, not just from a governance perspective, but the behaviors that we emanate from the leadership of the government and the state executive has the ability to transform how we as a people behave as well. And that's a very, very important thing that also forms the fabric of who we are and how we go forward in life.
But now the opposition leader is supposed to, I believe, been formally selected today, sworn in today, if I'm not mistaken. Will the Prime Minister also be there?
She's not necessarily, she's not needed to be
because
there. I think
that would be an opportunity to kind of see, I mean,
to be honest with you, I think the most appropriate fitting
first meeting,
the moment, the first meeting, you see that coming together really and truly should happen in the Parliament.
Okay.
And I think the greeting of each other across the Parliament floor on the day the Parliament is open, and that ceremonial opening takes place and everybody takes their oath as members of Parliament, I think that would be very much setting the tone for the country at a different level as well. But I think in this instance as well, the swearing in of the opposition leader and whatnot is also an opportunity to give each office holder their fair share of the spotlight, I should say. And I think everybody's entitled to that. All eyes will be on both ladies in the years to come and see how they work together across the floor. And it will also be interesting to see. I'm looking forward to see who the presiding officers are and the deputy presiding officers of the Parliament are.
Right.
If it happens to be all female, whoa, we are a house of women, right?
Here's another question to close. I just wanted to ask, we know that the Trade Minister / Tourism Minister debated the merits of putting those things together. We don't have to get into that now. But I'm actually wondering about a couple other offices that we haven't seen. One, of course, is communications. Is that, as a ministry, going to continue to exist? It will be under the Office of the Prime Minister, as it did in the last term, with a minister or without a minister?
Well, I think, you have two ministers. Well, you have a minister in the Office of the Prime Minister, which is Barry Padarat, and then you have...
but he has a portfolio responsibility, though, of public utilities, right? Yes.
But under the Office of the Prime Minister, he could be the spokesperson for the government. I mean, Barry he's eloquent. Barry can, listening to him yesterday, it's not like he doesn't have the capacity to speak and to communicate. But also, Nicholas Morris is not a bad communicator either. I mean, I've known Nicholas for many years. He's matured, he's grown. He's been very good on the platforms as well. So, in terms of government communications, the Prime Minister is going to have to set the tone, and she's going to have to create a framework for the Ministry of Communications. I don't know. I am waiting to see the Gazette. The Gazette is going to tell me if communications went under public administration and artificial intelligence as well.
But
if it did, Dominic Smith is also a very good communicator. So, competence exists. It's now for them to use the competence to become accountable and to transparent and to show that they are capable. And I think the Prime Minister has read that more than once to everybody. So people are on their P's and Q's.
A quick thing, of course, you know, it is interesting now. We have female president, female prime minister, female opposition leader. It's a first, and dare I say, I'm hopeful for this first to actually be matter in a practical way of benefits to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. One of the things that is missing from the cabinet right now, and the PNM Zone League pointed out, and it's interesting because it's not necessarily a bad thing per se. Child and gender affairs as a separate ministry, they don't seem to have a minister. Now, some of those functions, even under the PNM, operated under the office of the Prime Minister. So it was this kind of a weird thing where I'm not entirely sure what the best thing would be, because again, do you need a separate ministry? Could it be a subsection of the office of the Prime Minister? Because you had both in parallel in the previous administration, in the previous term.
Well, you see, what I find to be hypocritical, and I hate to be so critical of the opposition in that regard, but when the Prime Minister created the Ministry of Gender, Youth and Child Development in her first dispensation as Prime Minister, she received heavy criticism for it. And they said the same thing about the Ministry of Justice that has been said now. They said the same thing about the Ministry of Gender, Youth and Child Development, which was really a prize and a baby, one of her prime ministerial babies, where she created a ministry that was specifically designed for gender, youth, and child development. And, you know, when she lost the election in 2015, Keith Rowley completely disbanded the ministry. He created the Gender Affairs Ministry, Child and Gender Affairs, under the Office of the Prime Minister, with Ayanna Webster serving in the cabinet. But now we see the Prime Minister keeping it tight, and yes, sport and youth affairs. And I don't think that any of the issues that, anything that touched, and I think it's one, very strategic politically to have Philip Watts as the Sport and Youth Affairs Minister. I think it's important to his constituency. It is important to the contribution to how we steer young people away from a life of crime. We also lend support and assist to the young people in eastern parts of Trinidad, and to be able to bring them into something that's meaningful. So I do still believe that gender is going to go under office of the Prime Minister. And again, Barry seems to have a lot he's going to have a lot on his plate, right? So, you know, and it's not like he's not able to function. So let's give them a chance. Today is day 2. Let's see what happens in 3 months, then 6 months, then 9 months, and then a year, as she rightfully said, one day at a time.
It's only day 2?
Today is only day 2, my friend.
I mean, God, I hope for your sake that you know, I don't know if I should ask for it to speed up or slow down, because I don't know what.
And as of yesterday, it was only a week from the election.
It's only a week from the election. Well, I'm still transitioning mentally. I have a lot of stuff that I need to change around, how you address people. I called, I have to apologize to her. I didn't actually formally apologize when I did it, but earlier on in the show, I used opposition leader to refer to Kamala Persad. I caught myself immediately, but it was still like, oh gosh.
Listen, Sean, the country has it's a quick switch of the brain. I mean, it happens like that. And yeah, you transition.
I do find how we transition, though, systemically, you know, policy-wise, I think it's too abrupt. I don't know if this is the best way to do it.
Well, you see, that's the Westminster Whitehall model. And we, you know, the Westminster Whitehall model is even worse. The Westminster Whitehall model is on the day after, literally on the day after, when the new Prime Minister goes to see the monarch. So it's more abrupt than you think it is there than it is here. But, you know, getting adjusted to the Honourable Prime Minister.
All right.
And I did slip the other day and say that Rowley as Prime Minister as well, and I had to correct myself.
Yeah, I think I have come close to that as well. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll open up the phone lines with Dr. Mohammed. Stay tuned. This is Talking Money WSN. We'll be right back after this.
Let me.
My name name is Dr. Stephen Carroll, the CEO at Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist, and we are committed to making good private healthcare affordable.
For all your medical needs, including dental, radiology, laparoscopy, behavioral and mental health, along with many other services, contact us for more information at 235-5479.
Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
The fluid retention occurs in the lungs and they get short of breath, particularly with exertion, and is a particularly condition where when lying down they feel short of breath and have to use a lot of pillows. That's a sign that the shortness of breath might be due to heart failure.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Every word, every line, every paragraph depicts a real moment in someone's life. A father, a sister, a mother, a brother. We at Newsday are dedicated to you, the people, and through independent, unwavering journalism, strive to always bring your stories to life. Because your stories are more than just words. Newsday, independent and credible.
Dr. Marwood will be joining us shortly, but in the meantime, we do have a caller that's been waiting during the commercial break from Digger Martin, so we'll take the call so he doesn't have to wait too long. Good morning, caller, you're on the air.
Good morning, Mr. Small, and I think you have your co-host, Dr. Mohammed, with you.
Well, he's not with us right now, but he'll be joining us back shortly, but you could go ahead. We don't want to have to wait too long.
A couple of things, and I'm really annoyed to hear that Whitehall is in this condition. I mean to say, the gentleman before the previous Prime Minister did a whole book on Whitehall, from Mason Hall to Whitehall. And if that is true, to leave that in that state tells me what sort of person he is. It's a reflection of his demeanor. The fact is, it tells me that he was not spending enough time. And I'm going to be facetious. He probably was playing too much golf and traveling too much. That was on all over the place with the opposition. So that is something that we should all hang our head in shame, allowing that to happen. And was that a practical opening of Whitehall? You understand? I mean to say, disgusting. You have your two new ministers going inside it to do a reconnaissance, and they have to call the Prime Minister and say, look, it's better you don't come because the place is dilapidated. Half the staff has moved elsewhere. That to me is a no-no. The cabinet now, I am seeing things that they have looked at, and they are now not going to be caught with their pants down. When they came in to the PP, there was a lot of issues. They were in a steep learning curve, and they suffered for not knowing the workings of the ministry. They got caught with the NICWAN issue, where a permanent secretary apparently was not forthcoming, because that permanent secretary ended up on a board of Republic Bank and ended up on the board of NICWAN. while telling them shut it down, but had a special agenda to pass it on to that. So, 4 ministers, I'm very happy with Jolene John. She knows how the ministry, she was in the Pandey government, she was responsible for executing the plan and a lot of things with UDGOT. She has gone into transport. They have to fix that Point 14 highway quickly and a number of things. You have Rudy Monila, MP Rudy Monila is a seasoned politician. He understands the ministry. You have the Attorney General. He understands the HE office. He knows the workings of it. So those three, together with Dr. Bodo in the Ministry of Health, he was responsible for establishing the Children's Hospital. Now he's there to bring that on board. You have Mr. Dowlat. He's fresh from being the principal of 2 schools, Irie High School, Napari High Performance, so they understand the requirements of the education to produce high flyers based on meritocracy. I believe they're on the right track. The other issue is, and this is where national security comes in with the Attorney General, to fix the police service once and for all. We have to appoint a new commissioner of police. Sooner than later, a merit list was developed. I believe it's somewhere in Parliament. I want that merit list to be debated properly. Everybody on that merit list, to call them out, because a lot of them have questionable past. And that will tell us if the current police service commissioner was doing the job to generate that. For example, I'm not going to call names, DCP I&I, she has a question to answer with respect to who sent her there. She's in court. DCP operation, the Kakaman, a judge gave him castigating account of his affidavit. So a lot of these things, let us see who. There are a lot of bright young officers who come on your program, who go in on beyond the tape. A lot of them who could be moved up. They have the competence based on meritocracy. They are peers from my vantage to be clean. So I believe if I was there, it's to change most of the executive, and most of all, debate back in Parliament the Joint Select Committee on the DR Police, and you will see something there. The whole police force, the GEB, etc., had a blue flu, and the security detail of the then Prime Minister and Attorney General left the thing. Nobody was disciplined for that yet. All the executive at that point in time has been reticent, quiet on who should have been disciplined. Go on. Have a nice morning.
Thank you, caller. A lot to unpack there. The comments about Whitehall, I'm not necessarily going to say that it's telling of the Prime Minister or not, but I will acknowledge the fact that it looks bad regardless. The fact that it's... And of course, we welcome Dr. Mohammed back into the program.
No, but I'll tell you this, right? I thought it was very... for me, it was telling, because you boasted about Whitehall, one of your projects, and you spent $32 million to rehabilitate and bring Whitehall up to scale. And for me, listening to what the minister said yesterday in their conversation and with the permanent secretary, flooding, mold, not conducive for operations and not conducive for the Prime Minister, the new Prime Minister, to come in. So really and truly, Rowley created a facade. Then, in terms of, I can't imagine that he would want to work in a
It's also a cultural building, right? Now, there are reports that the White House in Washington, it's not necessarily the best, most modern, well-maintained facility, you know, at least certain rooms. But regardless, to some extent, you shouldn't allow these things to be so... Because it's one thing to say, well, it's not as clean as you think, or it's maybe old and a little more rundown than you think. It's another thing to say, well, we can't use it because it's a health concern. It's a cultural icon. It's part of the Magnificent Seven. It is one of the things that, in theory, tourists will go to see to snap pictures of. Oh, look at Whitehall in
But when you spend $32 million on something like that, and you don't maintain it, and it's been open since 2019, so it's 6 years. So 6 years, taken into consideration, not my words, they have gone through COVID. What was going on? How could you have people working in conditions where there's mold and flooding and whatnot. That's not, I mean, and Whitehall, as far as I remember, Whitehall's flooring is not concrete, it's wood. So we're spending money to also, expensive wood that they would have used for flooring to be further undermined by flooding and mold and whatnot. No, I really think that that's unfair, and I think that's unfair to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, because we spent money for that, and you have a responsibility and a duty to undertake to maintain, if not for yourself, but for those who you work with, which is the public officers as well, the public servants.
It does make me wonder if this is an extension of their financial policies or lack thereof. That is to say, minimal spending. So we'll cut costs wherever we can. Now, it's not to say that I have similar complaints over certain specific things from the partnerships era, right? But regardless, one of the things that I don't understand is, it's one thing for me to say it. It's another thing for you to try to excuse your behavior that's saying, well, the other side did it too. It's like, at some point, we don't want to hear that, right? You're supposed to be better than. So at best, you're just as bad, or at worst, you're worse than. And I think if it was some other building, personally, I might have been a little bit more generous. But it's Whitehall, and it was refurbished 6 years ago. So we're talking about value for money. If all it takes is 6 years and a building is now uninhabitable, then to what extent do we have to question contracts given out within the last 10 years to say what went wrong, right? Because this is Whitehall. This is one of those things where it's one thing, some government building that you never walk into, the contractor kind of shortcuts and does shoddy work, and you don't see it as Prime Minister. This is supposed to be your office. You're supposed to see these things. This is supposed to be readily apparent. You know, if there's one thing you're not supposed to miss, it's the obvious thing about the place where you sit. So, yeah, it is. I don't necessarily want to like pile on Dr. Keith Rowley, but at the same time, the implications of something like this for the nation, could you imagine if our political rivals regionally get wind of this, the kind of hate that regional press could have? Do we have another call? Okay, we have a call on the line. Good morning, caller, on the air.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
Good morning to you, Sean, and your guest. Calling from Trin City.
Yeah.
I was listening to your conversation with regard to the maintenance of the building, Whitehall, etc. What we need to do is go back to the days when the Ministry of Works were maintaining and building our buildings. That means our national buildings. We transitioned from the Ministry of Works to private enterprise building buildings, and that has evolved right down to, I would call it, Balize juice, construction companies, eating our food. 32 million spent on refurbishing a building. It was probably not used in, COVID 2020 to 2022, and you must have what I would call a maintenance program in place to keep up for maintenance and upkeep. Ministry of Works can do the job. You hire the guys under the ministry, plumbers, electricians, masons, etc. Once you do a major refurbishment, you get a maintenance schedule in place and you continue going forward. That way you save a lot of money, you create employment, and you enhance the skills of the guys. You know, many guys cut their teeth. Fellas my age and over were apprentices to the Ministry of Works. Plumbers, woodworkers, construction men, masons, electricians, you know, that kind of thing, right? Welders. And they were put in different areas. When you leave the central area of the Ministry of Works, you put in different areas to do maintenance in different government buildings. That has gone out the door. It is more contractors getting rich off of taxpayer funding. In Ministry of Works has been emasculated, and we have to get back to that model in terms of maintaining our government buildings. Have a good day, fellas. Take care.
Thank you, caller. I mean, I think the problem is, and I've said this before with solutions like that, The problem is the public sector is not necessarily efficient, and you're going to potentially get problems going in that direction as well. So you have a solution that is undermined by other problems that also need to be fixed, to be fair. So I can't say that I'm in full agreement with that. I do think there are pros and cons to both, and there is a lot of questions with regards to how these contracts are awarded, you know, who is being enriched, you know, to what extent are we getting proper value for the money that's being spent. And what did not help is how procurement legislation was implemented, because right now it looks like a house of cards among other legislations that look like paper tigers at best, based on what we've seen. Not necessarily what's there in the legislation, but how they've been implemented. But there's a couple of things I want to get back to, Dr. Mohammed. And I do think, and I've said this before, I'm not sure if I said it with you, that one of the first big decisions is going to be the next police commissioner, right? One of the things that bothered me was the Social and Welfare Association saying, yep, you're debating these poor people in Parliament and they're under scrutiny and it's unfair. And there's a part of me that's like, hold on, time out. And I didn't necessarily fully understand why it bothered me, and maybe I have a better idea. The Commissioner of Police is a very public office. It's a very public office that comes under scrutiny. If you can't take scrutiny then, you're going to take scrutiny if you get the office now. Because look at the last couple of years and the amount of criticism that's been thrown at the police executive in the last two and a half years. And the fact of the matter is, if you can't hold up to public scrutiny in a parliamentary debate, which I believe, at least right now, I don't know if the Prime Minister is going to have the time to make a change, because Ayla's contract is up from, I believe it's the 14th. I don't know if Junior Benjamin could hold on in the interim, because you need a police commissioner. But my point is, the caller before said full parliamentary debate, and I agree with that 100%. If you can't stand up to that, or you don't want to go through that gauntlet, maybe you should pull your name from consideration as Commissioner of Police, because it's a public post, it's not a private post. You can't hide behind things as Commissioner of Police. The former Minister of National Security tried to do a lot of hiding, and the public didn't accept that. To some extent, the Commissioner of Police, at times, she started to hide more behind other spokespersons. It didn't necessarily help the situation. What do you make about what I just said?
No, I agree with you. It is very true what you said with regard to the position of Commissioner of Police is quite possibly one of, it's up there in terms of scrutiny and popularity, and the face of being you're the face of the national security apparatus. You're the face of you're the head of the main entity that protects and serves the country. So why not, be in front of the public and face the scrutiny that you want? You see, I always say people want authority, but they don't want the responsibility that comes with it. And the Commissioner of Police has to understand, whoever he or she may be, they have to understand that the authority that is vested in them comes with a huge responsibility. And one of those responsibilities is ensuring public trust and confidence and facing the questions and scrutiny of the public and questions. And one of the key persons and personnel that assist in that scrutiny is the media. And if you're not prepared to meet the media and have a conversation with them, answer the questions that emanate from, public discourse, then you've missed a significant part of the job. I also think that beyond just the debate in the Parliament, I think one of the things that we could start looking at from a governance perspective is the role of a joint select committee as it pertains to the hiring of these persons, and put them before a joint select committee and answer the question of the whole.
I agree with that, because we see it in America. Because, and again, when the association says you're embarrassing these people, well, in America, the cabinet candidates, they are basically hauled in front of a joint committee to be grilled, to be exposed.
And internationally.
Internationally exposed. So that's the thing. There's precedence for this. To some extent, dare I say, if you want public office, you need to put your thoughts about having a private life and keeping things private and being a private person off to the wayside. It just doesn't work anymore. I mean, even people in the media like myself need to understand, we don't have much of the authority or rewards of being somewhat public, but we have the responsibility to not do anything foolish. So, because at the end of the day,
I 100% agree with you on that.
right? I mean, I'm sure you kind of know it too. You know, we're kind
Not
of.
kind of.
Well, yes, you might know it
of.
even worse than me, as both you know, an educator. That's a more public role than people might realize.
Yeah, no, it is, and I will say that I agree. And when the Prime Minister said much is given, much is expected, you have to listen. You have to take a responsibility for what you do, how you do it, how you engage with persons, and to ensure that every aspect of your life. I mean, we're human, we're not robots, but at the same time, with authority comes responsibility, and having a voice in the public space comes a responsibility. But you know, I agree with you that those office holders that are the face of institutions of the state, they must be prepared to face the scrutiny of the public. And you know, I will go so far as to say, if your professional life is so competent and it is so outstanding, and you have accomplished so much in your professional capacity, nobody cares about your personal life, you know.
Well, that's the thing. It's not even about the personal life. They're concerned, oh, we're embarrassing them unfairly. But with what? What is it that a parliamentarian in a debate could say that's going to be so bad, especially if it's not true?
Agreed.
Because if you're that embarrassed by the truth, maybe you shouldn't be in public office, because you're going to get the scrutiny one way or the other. We've already seen rumors come out of the police service when Erla was arrested. Let's be real now. There's always that possibility. The more public you are, the more people will have an interest in to take you out, whether fairly or unfairly. You want to be a public officer, a public official, when you have skeletons in the closet that you want to keep in the closet. That doesn't make sense to me on a practical level. But I just want to close at one thing, because again, one of the big agendas is crime. One of the big decisions is a new police commissioner. Of course, ironically, we have somebody who used to be a subordinate of the executive is now their boss in very short order, and is potentially going to be part of the decisions to select the new commissioner of police in some capacity. The caller made an interesting point with regards to officers that are ranked underneath the current executive, more junior officers. They're really mid-level officers, right? At the inspector to assistant superintendent levels, a superintendent, maybe senior superintendent. Now, I don't know how far the Police Service Commission, based on what the new commission said, they could only go as low as assistant commissioner of police. But to some extent now, have you heard anything about the candidate pool being considered, or any indication of who the current administration might be looking at? Because I am fearful that the candidate pool might be limited, and whether they actively choose it, or they are forced to choose someone that is kind of pre-existing in that space, and it's not necessarily going to be an inspiring choice.
I think in this instance, you know, I've heard nothing with regard to a change just yet, because Mr. Benjamin is acting, and I gather that you can't just scrap the acting appointment of someone, you know, because with the change of administration. I mean, he is the most senior after the.
Although he's only there because Ayla was arrested and suspended, and that arrest is questionable even now.
But until that, when they get to that part of it, I'm sure that there's going to be some level of looking at who is best poised and who's best equipped with the wisdom, the knowledge, the experience, the understanding, the charisma, the temerity. I mean, selecting the commissioner of police is not just about, you know, for the purposes of seniority. It's meritocracy as well. And the other part of it is that who is best, who is the best person that can create create confidence in the police service among the police officers, be encouraging, be inspiring, be motivating. That's all part of leadership, especially in that kind of organization. Who is best to go and to get, not just stay in Port-au-Prince, but to go down on the ground with their officers and create an environment where they feel appreciated, understood, relatable, and can, push them towards being high performance workers. I think that's very important as well. I don't see that in the last couple of months we haven't heard any major complaints from the service about the current acting commissioner of police. I assume that he is going to be one of those persons to be seriously considered for the post. He would probably have to go through the process of reapplying or I don't, I really and truly don't know if it would be if they may command the Police Service Commission to go back out. But there's a list, and as you say, is the list satisfactory to the government, to the current government's in the current government's view? We don't know, and those things are part of the governance process that we are going to have to get to. I see this morning the Minister of Health is back at the San Fernando Teaching Hospital, so clearly San Fernando General Hospital is going to be receiving a lot of attention because there are several inefficiencies, procedural gaps, staffing gaps, customer and patient care gaps that is existing. San Fernando General Hospital needs a revamping of processes and procedures. In fact, the entire RHA Act needs review. I think after 30 years, 31 years this year, the RHA Act is outdated, and there needs to be some new work done on the RHA Act in terms of the operationalizations, the processes, the procedures, the staffing, the motivation. I mean, everything from an HR framework, pushing it into a corporate entity, in a corporate-esque framework that makes it more functional, more service-oriented, in fact. Because, by God, the public health service is not where it ought to be after all these years.
Well, we have to close, but I'll just be quick on this. The Police Service Commission did say the candidates for Commissioner of Police, based on their statements, it's the Assistant Commissioner and Deputy Commissioners. And because they said, well, if we could choose the Assistant Commissioners, we would increase the talent pool we have to select from, which I think is something to be considered in the future. More importantly, Stuart Young did say that they would need legislation to make it a true meritocracy when the question of going underneath the rank of assistant commissioner to select a candidate. And that's my thing. It's a meritocracy, but it's a limited meritocracy because the candidate pool is a limited candidate pool. That's the implications of what's being said. I have not been in the process to know for sure. But the last thing that you said, Dr. Mohammed, I'll just say this. What I fear is that the budgetary demands right now on the government is going to be so long, that list, right? And the shortfall, because I always said the deficit is not the true deficit. There are a lot of things we just don't pay for that we technically need. I do not envy the current administration, and I do think they're going to have a harder set of choices to make than the population is probably aware. And I want to say up front, don't be surprised if things are not going to look as though they're that much better in the short run, because that's the reality that we were in for years now. My issue with the PNM is that they didn't necessarily want to admit it to the population. More than anything else, that was something that I found to be very, very interesting and very unfortunate. But I will leave that there because we're out of time. Dr. Mohammed, thanks for joining me once again to have this conversation on the new cabinet, the new administration. We're almost seeing the direction that Kamala Bissau-Bissessar is looking to steer the country towards. Folks, thanks to the callers. This is Talking About on WESN, reminding you to have a good day, stay safe, remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other, and never forget that it's nice to be nice, and we will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
WESN.
My name is Dr. Stephen Carroll, the CEO at Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist, and we are committed to making good private healthcare affordable.
For all your medical needs, including dental, radiology, laparoscopy, behavioral and mental health, along with many other services, contact us for more information at 235-5479.
Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
The home of Caribbean content is growing, and we welcome you to be a part